Okay, artists, so we are now at the point where we are going to do our mixed complementary colors, okay? So what this means is we're going to mix up a little bit of one color, we're going to mix up a little bit of its complement, and then we're going to mix them together. So I'm going to start setting that up. I'm going to talk a little bit while I'm doing it. And this is a good opportunity that if you forgot to paint some things in. Maybe you forgot to paint some of the colors into the center. Maybe you forgot to paint some of your vocabulary. This would be your opportunity to paint those in before you do your mixed complementary color. Okay, so I'm going to start off with yellow and purple. And I'm going to, again, I'm always going to be mixing my colors, and I always test them ahead of time. Right? And I only need a little bit of each color. I don't need a ton of both colors unless I'm filling in some extra things here. All right? And then of course we talked about our purple, which is going to be our cool red mixed with our cool blue. I already got a little bit of another color going in there. Rinse my brush off. Pick up some of that cool blue. Make my purple. And that's pretty good. So at this point, if you had other things that you had forgotten about to paint in, I would paint them in. So I've got a little bit of yellow. Maybe I would paint it in here. But I've got all of mine filled in. So now that I've got my two complementary colors mixed together, or mixed on the palette, I'm going to mix them together. And what you should get is this sort of like brownish, tannish color, okay? And that is normal. That's what would happen when you mix those two together. You sort of get this neutral brown, and that's what happens when you mix your complements together. They neutralize, all right? And I'm gonna paint this in two spots. I'm gonna paint this under my yellow mixed complementary color. And then I'm also going to paint this under my purple mixed complementary color, which is right across, because again, it's mixed yellow and purple. So obviously it would go under both headings. And that is how we are going to complete our color wheel. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is mixing up little bits of each of our complements. Okay, so now let's say I'm going to do orange and blue. This is the only time you're going to mix more than two colors together, right? Because I'm going to need to mix two colors to make my orange. I'm going to need two colors to mix my blue. And then I'm going to mix all of that together to get my mixed complement. So I'm starting off with my yellow, rinse my brush, go into my warm red, so now I've got my orange, and I put a little bit of water on the opposite side of that part of my palette because I know that I'm going to be mixing those two colors together. And again, I'm trying to pick up as much pigment as possible. Rinse my brush off. Pick up my cool blue. So that way I'm making my true blue, as we've discussed prior to this in the last video. So I've got my blue, I've got my orange, and now I'm going to mix those two together, and you're going to see they neutralize and they sort of make this darker, sort of brownish tannish color. And then we're going to paint in both those sections on our color wheel. So I'm not going to do all of the colors here for the video. Now that you know what you need to do and how you need to do it, you can go right ahead and mix the other complements together. If you are a little confused and you're not sure which colors to mix together, remember, under your vocab, all of the complements are right next to each other. That's why we put them down there. That's why we painted them in, so you would know which colors that you would need to use to mix together for that. So I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to clean my palette, get some fresh water, and then we're going to talk about how we're going to complete the bottom portion of this, which is the last part we're going to do, and that is our monochromatic strip down here at the bottom. All right, artists, we're here for the last part of our color chart, which is the bottom, and that is going to be our monochromatic strip of colors. Now, in talking about this, we said that mono means one, and chroma is color, so one color. We are going to mix up one color, and then we are going to try to get as many tints and shades from that color as we possibly can. So you can see I'm putting quite a bit more water on my palette than I normally would, because I want to mix up quite a bit of this initial color that we're going to do. And when you're wondering what color, instead of mixing two colors together this time, you can pick any color on the palette, and that's what we're going to use. And I'm going to use the cool red for this. I've already got it wet, so I can start to pick up some of that pigment. And again, I want this to be a very strong version of this color. So I'm going to be mixing here for quite a few times here, trying to pick up pigment, and I've got a ton of water here, which is more than I normally have. So I want that color to look stronger. I want it to paint stronger, because we're going to be using it for this entire strip, and we're going to be mixing some things, and we just want to make sure that we've got enough pigment in there so that it lasts. And I'm going to test my color on my test strip, and that is a pretty darn good version of that color. So I'm actually going to paint it a little lower, and I'm going to be using the edge of this to help me when doing this monochromatic version that we're going to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint in a box with this plain color. So right where we have this divide that divides the two parts of our bottom, we're going to paint this solid color in right to the right of that center line. So this is going to be the strongest version of this color that we paint. And again, if you start to get some puddling, I got some really thick areas here that are kind of puddling, I'm just going to kind of dry my brush off, pick that up, and just let that dry. So now we are going to start with creating our tints. So in a separate part, just like we've done before, I'm going to put some water. And again, a tiny bit more than I normally do. And I'm going to dry my brush off really well, okay, because I'm going to be pulling from this middle puddle of color that I'm going to do and adding it to that water. So we already know the lightest we can go on white paper is white, so I'm going to leave this first box alone. I'm going to take just a little bit. You don't want to take a ton for this first tint, and mix it into that puddle of water. And it's going to look super, super light, super, super light, and that's kind of what we want. We want it to be a very light first value, and you can kind of see on the camera there, it's very, very light. It's going to dry a little bit darker. And I'm going to paint that second box, not the first box. First box we're going to leave white. I'm going to paint that second box in with that first tint that I created. And again, I got a little bit of puddling happening, so I'm just going to kind of dry my brush off. I'm going to wipe that puddle up so it'll dry a little more even. And now I have my first tint. So what I'm going to do now is, again, dry my brush off. I'm going to take a little bit more, mix it in. Now my goal is to make sure that my next tint is darker than the one that I have painted. So I'm going to take a brush full, mix it in. It looks like it changed, but again, I'm going to test it on my test sheet just to be sure that it's darker. And it's definitely a little bit darker. So now I'm going to take that and paint that into my next box. So as you can see, as I go, I'm going to start to get a little darker and a little darker, and I'm going to keep adding more of the pigment, my nice strong color, in until I get to this one, which should be kind of close to that original color. It may not be exact. We want it to be close, but it doesn't need to be exact. And if for some reason when you paint the next value on, if it doesn't look darker, it looks very similar, all that's going to tell you to do is you need to add a little bit more pigment into your next value so that it will look darker once it is painted on the paper. And again, they're going to dry a little bit darker than what you're seeing, so you just want to be careful that you don't go too dark too quickly. All right, so I'm doing pretty good. Give this a little mix. This one's definitely looking a little bit darker. So I'm going to add that one in. And if for some reason they were too light, you could let it dry and then paint another coat on top of that. Because the more layers you add in watercolor, the darker it's going to appear. I think that might be a little too light still, so just like I said, I'm going to take and dry my brush off and take another good swipe of the color. And I think that's going to do it. So this is going to be my last value in the sequence. For my tints. And then we know that now, at this point, we're going to want to get darker. And to get darker, we're going to start to add some black. So now, again, we're going to start off with just a little bit of black. All we're really trying to do is make the color look a little bit darker. Not a lot. And of course, my black pan is very dry, so I'm going to try and pick up just a little bit. Got my brush wet. And I'm going to mix it into my original color, this really big puddle here. And it's going to change, but I'm hoping it doesn't change too much. And now on my strip, my test strip here, I'm going to test it next to that other color. And that's not too much darker. That's actually pretty good. So I'm going to start to work my way on the right side, now working with my shades. So every time I do this, again, my goal is that the color is going to get a little darker and a little darker the more black I add into it. And by the time I get to this last box, it should be pretty close to black. I still don't want you to paint it fully black, but it should get pretty close to being like a dark, almost black version of that color. And on the screen, it may look like it's black, but there's still definitely going to be color in there. All right, so that's definitely darker. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to paint the next value. And then just continue until I get to the end. And this will give you a value scale that you can kind of refer to when we start working on our watercolor paintings. So if you're saying, okay, well, I want it to be dark, I don't really know how dark it should be, you can kind of look and see, okay, well, I know I put 1, 2, 3 brushfuls of black in to get this really dark version of this color. So I should try that with whatever color I'm using. I've got 2 boxes left. Hopefully they're going to look pretty dark by the time I get to that last one. And again, don't forget to always rinse your brush off in between, even when you're going into black, because if you put another color into that black, it's going to change how it looks when you are mixing it with a different color. Yep, I'm getting darker, darker, darker as I go. I know on the screen it just looks super dark. That's what happens when the paint is pretty fresh and wet. And then finally, my last value. Which is going to be really dark. Yep. Super, super duper dark. And here I have my monochromatic value scale. Okay, so once you have finished, you can get your watercolor palette cleaned up. Make sure you rinse out your water cups and your brushes. Wait for this to dry before you take a picture of it. If you pick it up while it's still wet, you'll have more of a chance that it will run on you, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, so once you've done all that and it's dry, make sure you take a picture. You upload this to Schoology so that you can get credit for it. And if you have not finished the drawing that we've been working on, you will now continue working on that until it is time to paint. And that's it. That is our watercolor chart for foundations.